Have you ever seen the actual future? Not the CGI spectacles pumped out by Hollywood, and not the polished promises sold on an Apple keynote stage, but the real, tangible future you can reach out and touch. If you fly into the Seoul of 2026 and step out onto the observation deck of the Lotte World Tower, it's staring right back at you. It is the most flawless, hyper-advanced, and utterly terrifying city on Earth. A living, breathing cyberpunk movie set where neon bleeds acid light into the streets and gigabit internet courses through the very air faster than you can blink. This is Seoul, the beating heart of South Korea. It's the ultimate showcase of human achievement, a shining city on a hill that crawled out of the ashes of the Korean War and, in just half a century, pulled off the miracle on the Han River, morphing from a dirt-poor agricultural fringe into the digital capital of the universe. But look a little closer at those pristine skyscrapers scraping the low Asian sky. Listen closely to the streets. You can hear the hum of server farms, the whisper of EV tires on asphalt, the relentless ping of Kakao Talk notifications. But you won't hear the one thing that matters. You won't hear life. Inside this flawless, micro-calibrated machine, there is a deafening, dead silence that even the loudest K-pop anthems blasting from every speaker can't drown out. Seoul today is a gilded cage. It's a luxury mausoleum built for a civilization that has voluntarily decided to lie down in its own coffin, but do it as aesthetically as possible, under a ring light and heavily filtered for Instagram. Take a walk through Gangnam at night. It's ground zero for extreme wealth, where a square foot of concrete costs more than a human kidney, where plastic surgery clinics outnumber grocery stores, and the faces walking past you are so flawless, they look like they were generated by Midjourney. Here, caught in the blinding glare of Samsung and LG billboards, surrounded by robot baristas brewing your coffee in dead silence and smart intersections tracking your every move, you suddenly feel obsolete. The human being here is an outdated model, biological debris, a glitch in the code the system is actively trying to optimize away. We look at South Korea and see a tech utopia: bullet trains, world-class street food, cutting-edge skincare promising eternal youth. But it's not a utopia. It is the waiting room before the execution. Behind this glossy, photoshopped facade lies a massive black hole that is slowly swallowing an entire nation. This city is a grand illusion, a collective fever dream of 50 million people running forward at breakneck speed simply to outrun reality. And the reality is this: playgrounds in residential neighborhoods are rusting and overgrown with weeds because there's no one left to play on them. Schools that once echoed with loud bells are being flipped into nursing homes, where the only sounds are shuffling slippers and the steady beep of heart monitors. Maternity wards are being retrofitted into columbariums and funeral parlors because the business of death has become far more lucrative than the business of life. This isn't just another demographic slump that gray-suited economists drone on about on cable news. No, this is something entirely different. It's an existential catastrophe, a biological rebellion. It's the quiet but furious scream of a whole nation that simply said no to continuing its bloodline. South Korea built the ultimate consumer society, an engine of absolute efficiency where there is zero margin for weakness, zero time for a pause, and, as it turns out, zero room for children. Kids are inefficient. Kids are expensive. Kids are an anchor dragging you down in a hyper-competitive rat race where you're forced to run a marathon at sprint speed 24/7. So, Koreans made their choice. They chose extinction. We're conditioned to think the end of the world means a mushroom cloud, a meteor strike, or a zombie apocalypse. But what if the apocalypse looks entirely different? What if it doesn't arrive with the roar of explosions, but in the absolute silence of an empty apartment lit only by the cold blue glow of a monitor? What if the end of civilization is just eating a solitary dinner from a 24-hour convenience store, paid for with loyalty points, with absolutely zero hope that anyone will carry on your legacy? The Seoul of 2026 is a towering monument to human loneliness, forged from glass and steel. It's a city where everyone holds the latest flagship smartphone, but has absolutely no one to call when the terror truly sets in. We are standing on the edge of the greatest vanishing act in modern history, and the most terrifying part is that no one is fighting back. Everyone is just staring down at their screens as the ship slowly but surely slips beneath the waves to a catchy TikTok track. Welcome to South Korea. Welcome to the future that isn't going to happen. Let's strip away the emotion and look dead into the eyes of the most terrifying thing in our world: dry, ruthless math. Because numbers don't lie. They can't be spun by political propaganda, you can't cover them up with foundation, and you can't hide them behind a pretty social media filter. In demographics, there's a concept known as the replacement rate. That magic threshold, the gold standard any nation needs just to tread water and avoid vanishing from the face of the earth, which is exactly 2.1 children per woman. Memorize that number, 2.1. It is the lifeline, the border between existence and oblivion, below which begins a slow but guaranteed slide into the abyss. If you look at most developed nations, you'll see they are teetering right on that edge. But South Korea didn't just dip below the line, it crashed through the floor and is currently in a state of demographic freefall. In 2023, that metric plummeted to a monstrous, unthinkable 0.72, and in Seoul, this shining capital of the world, it dropped even further, below 0.6. This isn't just a statistic you skim over in the morning paper with your coffee and forget about. It is a death warrant signed for an entire civilization. To really grasp the scale of this catastrophe, picture medieval Europe during the Black Death, the plague that wiped out half the continent in the 14th century. Even then, amid mountains of corpses and burning pyres, women kept having children, and the population shrank slower than it is shrinking right now in a peaceful, well-fed, hyper-advanced South Korea. This is a completely unique precedent in human history. A species sitting at the absolute peak of its comfort and security, refusing to reproduce with such ferocity it's as if nature itself flipped a genetic self-destruct switch. Try to visualize this arithmetic of extinction. Imagine 100 Koreans, that's the grandparent generation. They have 70 children, the next generation. And those 70 children, if current trends hold, will produce fewer than 25 grandchildren. Do you understand what that means? It means that in just 2 generations, in a mere 60 years, the population won't just shrink by 10 or 20%, it will be slashed to a quarter of its size, turning a vibrant nation of 50 million into a handful of elderly people living out their final days in ghost towns. This is called a demographic cross. The moment the mortality curve intersects the birth rate curve and shoots upward like a rocket, while the birth rate drops like a stone down a well, and South Korea passed that point of no return years ago. Now, this country sells more coffins than cribs and needs more funeral directors than midwives. Every single year, hundreds of kindergartens shut down. Their buildings stand with boarded-up windows like monuments to a vanished childhood, and nursing homes open up in their place because elder care is the only growth market left. Elementary schools in provinces like Gyeongsang and Jeolla stand empty, with maybe 2 or 3 kids sitting in a classroom, and teachers dread the first day of school because they know that one day, absolutely no one will show up. This is a quiet apocalypse. It happens without explosions or gunfire. It happens in bedrooms, where young couples decide to adopt a dog instead of having a kid, and in doctors' offices, where women request sterilization because they see zero point in bringing new life into this hellscape of endless competition. Back in 2006, Oxford demography professor David Coleman warned that South Korea could become the first country in modern history to go extinct naturally, just drying up like a dead creek. Back then, people laughed at him, calling it fear-mongering and heresy. But today, in 2026, no one is laughing anymore. The government is trying to extinguish the fire with cash, throwing hundreds of billions of dollars at the problem, handing out subsidies that dwarf annual salaries in other countries, and promising subsidized mortgages and free taxis for pregnant women. But it's all useless. It's like trying to cure stage 4 cancer with an herbal tea, or trying to stop a tsunami with an umbrella. The money doesn't work because the problem isn't in their wallets, it's in their heads. It's baked into the very fabric of a society that has become fundamentally hostile to life itself. Mathematical models project that if nothing changes, by the year 2750, the last Korean will die alone, with no one left to bury them. And that countdown is ticking away inside every smartphone, inside every empty stroller, in the exhausted stare of every passerby. We are watching a grand social experiment where the ending has already been spoiled. The nation that built the fastest-growing economy is now displaying the fastest collapse. And that graph, that line plunging towards zero, is more terrifying than any horror movie, because at the end of that graph is a void, an absolute ringing emptiness, where the wind will howl through the hollow skyscrapers of Seoul, and there will be no one left to remember that a great nation, the creators of Samsung and Hyundai, ever lived here at all. Imagine that your life isn't a journey, but an endless, grueling sprint through a minefield, where every single step could be your last, where there is absolutely zero margin for error, no right to catch your breath, and even sleep is treated as a criminal waste of time, a luxury only losers can afford. Welcome to Hell Joseon. That's the bitterly ironic and utterly hopeless nickname young Koreans have given their homeland, comparing this glossy, high-tech modern democracy to the feudal era of the Joseon dynasty, a time when a person's destiny was strictly dictated by their bloodline, and slavery was simply a way of life. Only now, the slavery is voluntary and digital, and the shackles aren't forged from iron, but from crushing societal expectations, your GPA, and the prestige of the brand on your blazer. This particular brand of hell begins in the cradle. Literally from the moment a child takes their first breath, they are already entered into the race, already falling behind a psychotic schedule drawn up by their parents. At 4 years old, a Korean kid doesn't go to the playground to build sandcastles. They are sent to hagwons, private cram schools, where they are drilled in English, math, violin, and coding until late at night, until the exhausted toddler passes out in the car ride home, only to wake up tomorrow and do it all over again. By high school, this rat race mutates into a waking nightmare, a meat grinder that shreds the mental health of teenagers into absolute pulp. Korean high schoolers study for 16 hours a day, practically living in classrooms and libraries, chugging liters of energy drinks just to keep their faces from hitting the textbooks. And it is all for one single day of the year, the day of the Sunung exam. Sunung is the day the entire country holds its breath. Commercial flights are grounded, so the roar of engines won't distract students during the listening comprehension section. Police escorts with flashing sirens rush late kids to the gates of testing centers, and parents pray frantically outside temples, clutching amulets to their chests. This grueling 8-hour exam dictates absolutely everything: which university you'll get into, which megacorporation will hire you, who you will marry, and how your neighbors will look at you. And if you fail, if you don't score high enough to enter the top 3 so-called Sky universities, Seoul National, Korea, or Yonsei, you become an outcast, a second-class citizen, essentially invisible. This system engineers a monstrous level of pressure that no normal human being can withstand. It breeds a culture where suicide suddenly looks like a logical exit strategy, a way to hit reset on a game that was rigged against you from the very start. And if you think the hell ends after graduation, you are dead wrong. Because next comes the corporate inferno, ruled by Konde culture, a toxic, authoritarian hazing by senior bosses, and where there is a literal concept known as Godoksa, death by overwork. Yes, the Korean language has a specific word for dying from workplace exhaustion, and it isn't a metaphor. It's a medical fact, a legitimate line written on a death certificate. People drop dead right at their desks, their hearts giving out from chronic stress and sleep deprivation, simply because leaving the office before your boss is considered an unforgivable insult, a betrayal of the team. Even if you have absolutely nothing to do, you have to sit there and fake intense productivity until midnight. And then you have to follow your boss to a hosik, a mandatory corporate drinking session, where you are expected to down soju until you black out, just to prove your loyalty. You live in a microscopic studio apartment called a goshiwon, roughly the size of a solitary confinement cell, where you can reach the toilet from your bed without even standing up, and you pay half your paycheck for it. The other half goes to coffee to stay awake and designer clothes to look successful, because in Korea, your physical appearance is actual capital. It's a weapon. If you look exhausted, poor, or unattractive, you won't get hired, no one will date you, and you will simply be erased from social reality. This endless, senseless, all-against-all battle royale incinerates the soul. It turns human beings into zombies, into bio-robots who execute functions but do not actually live. Young people look at their parents, who sacrificed their entire lives on the altar of the economic miracle, and they don't see heroes, they see victims. Exhausted old people who never saw anything outside the 4 walls of an office, and they say, "I don't want this. I am not playing this game. I'm out." Hell Joseon is a place where success isn't measured by happiness, but by the sheer volume of suffering you can endure. It's a society that eats its own young, demanding the impossible, demanding they become superhumans, but ultimately producing broken dolls who dream of only one thing: for this endless race to finally stop, for this psychotic conveyor belt to break down so they can just exhale and feel like a living, breathing human being again, rather than just another line item on a performance review. Usually, when we think of a revolution, we picture noise. The roar of barricades, shattered storefronts, the thick smoke of burning tires, and the furious screams of a crowd packing a central square. But the most terrifying revolution unfolding right now in South Korea is absolutely silent. It's invisible to spy satellites and police drones because it's happening entirely inside human souls, in the dead quiet of lonely bedrooms and empty cafes. This is a rebellion through inaction, a massive genetic strike, a quiet but ironclad refusal to participate in the very essence of biological existence. And it has a name: the Sampo generation. The word Sampo translates to giving up 3 things, specifically dating, marriage, and children. These are the bedrock foundations that every human society has been built upon for millennia. But for Korean youth in the 2020s, these basic concepts have morphed into an unaffordable luxury, elite commodities reserved only for the privileged few, right up there with private jets and vintage wine collections. Young Koreans looked at the price tags society slapped on love and simply said, "No thanks, we're opting out. We can't afford to play." And it's not just about the money, even though the economic chasm here is monstrous. It's about emotional bankruptcy. Why go on a date when it feels less like a romantic meeting of 2 hearts and more like a brutal corporate job interview, where your partner is actively calculating the prestige of your college, your salary, the badge on your car, and even the zip code your parents live in. In Korea, love is no longer chemistry. It's cold, hard math, a corporate merger of assets. And if your portfolio is lacking, you are eliminated in the early rounds. You become an illiquid asset on the marriage market. Picture a guy working as a delivery driver, or a girl ringing up items at a 24-hour convenience store. They know with absolute certainty that they will never, ever save enough to buy an apartment in Seoul, where real estate prices have blasted into the stratosphere. They know the Jensei system, Korea's unique rental structure requiring a massive lump sum deposit, is fundamentally broken. So they make the cold, rational decision to surgically remove their own desires. First, they give up on dating because dinner and a movie simply cost too much. Then they cross off marriage because a Korean wedding is a vanity fair, a theatrical production designed to show off wealth to hundreds of guests. And finally, they pulled the plug on having kids because a child is the single most expensive investment project you can undertake, and the odds of a catastrophic return are just too high. But the most horrifying part is that it didn't stop at Sampo. This social gangrene began to spread. Soon, a new term emerged, oppo, giving up 5 things, which added home ownership and social life to the chopping block. And today, sociologists are whispering in horror about the NPO generation, where n is an algebraic variable stretching into infinity. This is the generation of total surrender. People who have abandoned their dreams, their hobbies, their hopes, and, essentially, life itself, turning into biological ghosts drifting through the streets of a megacity. Instead of real relationships, they choose virtual AI chatbot girlfriends. Instead of dinner with friends, they watch mukbangs, videos of strangers devouring massive piles of food on camera, feeding them a twisted illusion of presence, warmth, and a full stomach. It's a surrogate life, a placebo existence where genuine emotion is replaced by cheap dopamine hits from social media likes and impulse buying. They even have a phrase for this, shibalbyong, or f*** it expenses, where you blow money on expensive lipstick or a collectible toy just to feel a fleeting spark of joy in this gray tunnel of despair. This total refusal to reproduce isn't just millennial selfishness, despite what politicians yell from their podiums. It is a form of protest, a giant middle finger to a patriarchal society, the chaebol megacorporations, and the government. You want cogs for your factories? You want a fresh crop of taxpayers to fund your pensions? We aren't giving them to you. We are breaking the chain of suffering right here, with us. It's an act of pure mercy toward their unborn children, refusing to drag them into a world that offers nothing but hellish competition, stress, and crushing loneliness. Koreans are committing collective seppuku, but they are doing it in slow motion, stretching the process over decades. When you look into the eyes of a young Seoulite on the subway, you don't see the fire of youth. You see the icy void of a person who has already made up their mind. Someone who has accepted that they are the very last of their bloodline, an evolutionary dead end, leaving nothing behind but dust and total silence. The Korean language has words that will literally make your blood run cold. Words that simply shouldn't exist in a normal society, yet in Seoul, they've become part of the everyday vocabulary, as ordinary as the morning weather forecast or the stock market ticker. And the most terrifying of them all is Godoksa. The literal translation is lonely death, but that dry definition doesn't even begin to capture the chilling, visceral horror hiding behind those letters. Picture an apartment in a towering concrete anthill, where hundreds of people live stacked together behind paper-thin walls, where you can hear your neighbors sneeze or flush their toilet, yet absolutely no one knows the actual human being living next door. In one of these very units, a person dies, and the world doesn't even blink. Their phone stays dead, no one knocks on their door, the mailbox chokes on past due bills and junk mail, while their body lies quietly on the floor and begins to decompose. Days, weeks, sometimes entire months tick by, until the sickeningly sweet stench of death finally seeps through the air vents and under the door crack, forcing the neighbors to finally call the cops. When they inevitably pry the door open, what they find inside is a mummified corpse slouched in front of a glowing TV, surrounded by mountains of trash and empty green soju bottles. This is Godoksa, the ultimate finale of life in a megacity where the social fabric has been shredded to pieces. It used to be a tragedy reserved for lonely seniors, forgotten by children who moved away to conquer the capital. But today, in 2026, the epidemic of dying alone has gotten a brutal facelift. Now, they are pulling bodies from the apartments of men and women in their 30s, even their 20s. Kids who simply locked their doors to the world, dropped out of the rat race, and quietly faded away inside their concrete capsules. The specialized trauma cleaning crews tasked with scrubbing down these apartments, which, believe it or not, is a booming industry in Korea, tell the most harrowing stories. They find diaries brimming with absolute despair. They find unopened gifts that had no recipient. They find resumes that had been rejected hundreds of times over. These are the physical exhibits of total, suffocating isolation. A Korean society that for centuries was anchored by Confucian values, unbreakable family ties, and deep community respect has been ground into dust under the sledgehammer of hyper-capitalism. Now it is truly every man for himself. Everyone is just a solitary atom thrown into the chaotic Brownian motion of a gargantuan city. People are terrified of making connections, terrified to talk, terrified to show a single ounce of vulnerability. Because in this hyper-predatory arena, any weakness will be weaponized against you, and any heart-to-heart conversation is just future blackmail material. Loneliness has become a defense mechanism, a thick shell the snail retreats into, but that very shell eventually turns into a coffin. The phenomenon of the hikikomori, shut-ins who don't leave their bedrooms for years, is no longer just some dark Japanese quirk. South Korea now has hundreds of thousands of these modern hermits living entirely online, surviving on delivery apps, and physically terrified of the sunlight. To combat this, the government is dreaming up absurd, deeply dystopian band-aids, deploying AI companion robots designed to talk to the elderly so they don't lose their minds to the silence, and funding smartphone apps that automatically alert relatives if a user's phone hasn't moved in 24 hours. We are outsourcing the care of the human soul to algorithms. We are trying to replace human warmth with the thermal output of a processor. But no robot will ever replicate the empathy in a living gaze, and no neural network can simulate the grip of a human handshake. Godoksa is simply the terminal symptom of a societal cancer, the point where a metropolis of 10 million people effectively transforms into a barren desert. You can stand in a jam-packed subway car during rush hour, squished against strangers on all sides, feeling their breath and their body heat, while simultaneously being the most profoundly lonely creature in the universe, like an astronaut drifting through deep space with a severed tether. That is the terrifying paradox of Seoul. Never before have human beings lived packed so densely together, yet never before have they been so unfathomably far apart. Dying alone is just the final act of this tragedy, the exact moment a society that abandoned all solidarity is finally handed the bill. And the most harrowing part isn't that you'll die alone. It's the realization that your total erasure from existence will only be noticed when your body starts to smell, and distracts the neighbors from binge-watching their favorite K-dramas. This is the true price tag of extreme technological progress, paid in full with human dignity. If you think the most heavily guarded and dangerous border in Korea is the 38th parallel dividing the North and South, strung with minefields and machine gun nests, you are dead wrong. Because the real front line today isn't drawn on a geographic map. It cuts straight through the hearts and minds of the people, slicing the entire society cleanly in half along gender lines. This isn't just some petty domestic squabble over who does the dishes or who splits the dinner bill. This is an all-out, bloody, albeit silent, civil war, where men and women no longer look at each other as partners or soulmates, but as literal existential enemies, as biological threats that must be either suppressed or completely quarantined. At the absolute vanguard of this conflict stands a radical feminist movement known as 4B, or the Four No's. It's an ideology of total systemic boycott, a manifesto of female independence taken to its absolute extreme. No dating men, no having sex with men, no marrying men, and absolutely no having children. This isn't just a personal lifestyle choice, it is a militant political act, a collective womb strike designed to completely collapse the patriarchal machine that has exploited Korean women for centuries. The women in this movement cut their hair short and violently reject makeup, which in Korea is basically a mandatory corporate uniform, the corset of the 21st century, and openly declare their visceral hatred for the male sex, branding men with the slur hanamchung, which translates to male insect. On the other side of the barricades stand the Idenam, men in their 20s, a generation boiling over with resentment, venom, and a suffocating sense of injustice. They scream that they are the true victims of reverse discrimination, that radical feminists have hijacked the culture, and that while young men are forced to burn 2 years of their prime youth sweating in brutal military conscription for pennies, women get a head start building careers and hoarding privileges. This toxic resentment became such high-octane political fuel that it literally swept a conservative president into power. He rode the wave of anti-feminism straight to the top, promising to abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality as if it were a rogue propaganda wing of an enemy state. The atmosphere across the society is completely saturated with paranoia and dread. The air is so thick with weaponized hatred that the slightest spark triggers a massive detonation. Women are terrified to use public restrooms, terrified to try on clothes in fitting rooms, terrified to book hotel stays because the country is being ravaged by the epidemic of molka, hidden spy cameras. Microscopic lenses are stashed absolutely everywhere. Inside shower heads, stuffed into wall outlets, wedged into cracks in the plaster, and crystal-clear footage of your most intimate moments can be uploaded to porn sites literally 5 minutes after it was filmed. It is digital rape happening on a massive industrial scale. And it breeds such a paralyzing level of distrust that any man holding a smartphone is instantly viewed as a potential predator, a pervert. In retaliation, men coordinate vicious online witch hunts, doxing suspected feminists, nuking reputations, and launching massive cyber attacks against corporations that use hand gestures in their ads that allegedly mock male appendage sizes. Yes, you heard that right. The biggest megacorporations in the country have been forced to issue groveling apologies and scrub their logos just because the way a cartoon hand was drawn triggered male insecurities. It is absolute madness pushed to the point of surreal absurdity. It is a war of all against all, where the battlefields are internet forums, city streets, and bedrooms. Deepfake technology just poured gasoline on the fire. Thousands of ordinary women, school teachers, nurses, college students, suddenly found their faces digitally grafted onto hardcore porn videos circulating in encrypted Telegram chat rooms. An act of violation that effectively incinerated whatever scraps of empathy were left. How can you possibly love someone capable of doing that? How can you trust someone who sees you strictly as the enemy? The bridges haven't just been burned, they've been blown to dust. Dialogue is impossible. The old languages of love have been entirely forgotten, replaced by a venomous dialect of ultimatums and slurs. Korean men and women have essentially mutated into two entirely different biological species sharing the same landmass, but existing in separate, parallel universes. They never intersect, they never touch. They just exist behind impenetrable walls of cynicism. There are zero winners in this war, only losers. The unborn children, the unmade families, the cold, empty beds. The nation isn't dying from a pathogen or a famine. It is dying of pure hatred. Hate has become the only powerful emotion left capable of uniting people. But it unites them against something, never for something. And this toxic hatred is sterilizing the country far more efficiently than any chemical castration ever could, turning what was once a blooming garden into a scorched wasteland where lone wolves spend their days tearing out the throats of other lone wolves. If you pull up a satellite map of the Korean peninsula at night, you'll see a blinding, radiant patch of light in the northwest. That is Seoul, shining so intensely it looks like a supernova just detonated. But the second you shift your gaze slightly away, past the borders of the metropolitan sprawl, you'll see the darkness creeping in, swallowing up towns, villages, and entire provinces like a ravenous black hole. South Korea has, de facto, ceased to be a traditional country. It has mutated into a city-state, the Republic of Seoul, a monstrous, sprawling vacuum cleaner that violently sucks the lifeblood out of every other region, draining their money, their resources, their talent, and, most crucially, their youth. Take a ride on the KTX bullet train heading south, down toward Busan or Gwangju, and look out the window. You won't see pastoral landscapes. You will watch a slow-motion documentary of decay. Rusting playground equipment strangled by tall weeds, schools with boarded-up windows where only the wind roams the hallways, scattering old notebooks, and entire commercial blocks with steel shutters pulled down tight, plastered with faded "For Rent" signs taped up a decade ago. There is a grim, almost mystical prophecy in Korea known as the end of the cherry blossoms, which dictates that universities across the country will shut down and die in the exact same geographic order that the cherry blossoms bloom on the peninsula, starting from the deep south and creeping north. And that prophecy is fulfilling itself right now in real time. Regional universities that used to be thriving hubs of culture and life are turning into hollow concrete skeletons simply because there is no one left to enroll. The lecture halls are completely empty. Dormitories look like abandoned sets from a zombie apocalypse movie, and professors find themselves delivering lectures to a room full of ghosts. This is not merely an economic slump. It is the active necrosis of the country's living tissue, where the extremities are rotting away just to keep the heart pumping. But the heart, Seoul, is taking on too much blood and is actively drowning. Provinces like Gyeongsangbuk-do and Jeollanam-do, these names will soon only exist in history textbooks because they are undergoing a demographic catastrophe of biblical proportions. The only people left there are the deeply elderly, where being 80 years old is still considered young, and when the very last resident in one of these villages passes away, the town simply vanishes from the map, swallowed whole by the forest, wiping away all memory that human beings ever lived, loved, had children, and built futures on that patch of dirt. This hyper-concentration of absolutely everything inside Seoul creates a hellish, suffocating density, which is exactly what is killing the birth rate. Real estate prices in the capital have blasted into the stratosphere for the simple reason that an entire nation is trying to cram itself onto one tiny patch of dirt, triggering a psychotic rat race for every square foot, while just a couple of 100 miles away, perfectly good apartments sit completely empty, and you couldn't give them away for free. It is a vicious cycle, a closed doom loop. Young people flee to Seoul because there are zero jobs and zero prospects in the provinces, because all the youth have fled. To stay in your hometown is to officially sign your own certificate of failure. It means branding yourself a loser in the eyes of society. So everyone migrates to this glittering Babylon just to live in cramped shoeboxes, breathe in the smog, and permanently give up on having kids, all for the privilege of claiming they are part of a successful life. Meanwhile, small towns are mutating into open-air nursing homes, where ambulances take 2 hours to reach a patient because local hospitals went bankrupt and shuttered, where there are no obstetricians because no one is giving birth, and where bus routes are permanently canceled because burning gas just to transport empty air is too expensive. We are witnessing a totally unique phenomenon: the auto-cannibalism of a nation-state. The center grows relentlessly like a malignant tumor, actively killing the host organism it's feeding on, and no one has a clue how to stop it. The government attempts to put a band-aid on it by relocating bureaucrats and constructing artificial smart cities out in empty fields, but it's a total waste of time. People refuse to live in sterile, concrete boxes in the middle of nowhere. They want to be where the pulse of life is, even if that life is ultimately hollow and barren. South Korea is rapidly shrinking down to the footprint of a single city, leaving behind a trail of scorched earth, abandoned infrastructure megaprojects, and a ringing, terrifying silence radiating from deserted spaces where the only inhabitants left to roam the ruins of human civilization will be wild boars and packs of feral dogs. This is the geography of Extinction. It's a map where the blank spots multiply every single year, bleeding outward and creeping right up to the borders of shining Seoul, biding their time until they eventually swallow it, too. When we talk about the end of the world, we usually picture burning cities or flooded continents. But the true apocalypse for a modern civilization looks far more mundane and infinitely more terrifying. It looks like endless rows of red numbers bleeding across stock market tickers, and a national pension fund holding nothing but an IOU that absolutely no one is left to pay off. The legendary Miracle on the Han River, South Korea's ultimate point of pride, is mutating into an economic nightmare, a slow-motion catastrophe where basic math is actively at war with the very foundation of capitalism. Capitalism demands infinite growth, fresh consumers, and new labor. But Korea is a market that is violently shrinking, collapsing in on itself. Picture an inverted pyramid, a massive, incredibly unstable structure where the wide top is overloaded with a gigantic army of retirees, people who worked themselves to the bone their entire lives, physically built the country, and now simply want their well-deserved rest and decent health care. Meanwhile, down at the very bottom, at the single point of failure, stands a microscopic, exhausted handful of young people tasked with carrying this entire crushing weight on their shoulders. This isn't just an economic burden, it is financial slavery. According to economists, by the year 2050, every single working Korean will be forced to fully support one pensioner, meaning they will have to surrender half, if not more, of their paycheck strictly to taxes and Social Security. And this is in a country where the cost of living is already psychotic. Who on earth would sign that social contract? Who is going to willingly grind away for 12 hours a day, knowing every fruit of their labor will be devoured by a ravenous gerontocracy? South Korea's pension system is effectively a classic Ponzi scheme, a financial pyramid that only stays afloat as long as fresh investors, meaning new taxpayers, keep pouring in at the bottom. But there are no new investors. The maternity wards are ghost towns, and according to the most optimistic projections, the entire national pension fund will hit absolute zero, completely drying up by the year 2055. What happens then? Does the government just fire up the money printers? That triggers hyperinflation and vaporizes everyone's life savings. Or do they hike the retirement age to 80? Just look at the streets of Seoul today. You will see an army of the elderly scavenging for cardboard boxes, dragging massive, overloaded carts of scrap paper through heavy traffic, literally risking their lives just to scrape together a few bucks for a bowl of rice. The elderly poverty rate in Korea is the absolute highest in the entire OECD. Nearly half of all seniors are living in destitution, and this is happening in one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. This is the exact future staring down today's 30-somethings. They know with absolute certainty there will be no pension waiting for them, and they know their golden years won't be spent on cruise ships, but locked in a brutal fight for survival. Now pivot and look at the factories, the very spine of the Korean economy. The Hyundai shipyards, the Samsung megaplants, the Kia assembly lines. There is simply no one left to work them. The average age of a worker on a Korean shipyard is rapidly closing in on 60. Young people refuse to take on dirty, dangerous, and difficult blue-collar jobs, even for fantastic pay. They would rather push papers in an office or run gig economy deliveries, and robots, no matter how advanced, cannot replace human hands everywhere. The massive corporations are in full-blown panic mode. They can't fulfill production orders, and they are hemorrhaging their competitive edge to China and India, where human labor is practically infinite. It is a brutal twist of fate. A country that bet its entire existence on exports and cutting-edge tech is going to suffocate from a lack of people capable of physically maintaining that tech. The domestic market is actively dying because the elderly simply don't consume. They don't buy the latest flagship gadgets, fast fashion, new mortgages, or flashy cars. They buy prescription meds and hire home aides. A stagnation economy is one where high-end boutiques board up their windows and pharmacies take their place, where startups wither and die because venture capitalists are terrified to pump money into a dying nation. Korea's credit rating will inevitably slide. Foreign investors will yank their capital out, and the ferocious Asian tiger that once roared across the globe will be reduced to a sick, mangy cat incapable of even catching a mouse. This is the total collapse of a model that once looked invincible. It is ironclad proof that GDP cannot grow infinitely if the nation itself is going extinct. And this economic meltdown won't be a sudden, spectacular explosion. It will be a long, agonizing strangulation, where every single year is slightly worse than the last, with zero hope for a turnaround, because demographics are destiny, and you cannot rewrite that destiny, no matter how much cash you print. There is one topic in Korean society that is even more terrifying to discuss than death. A topic that is an absolute taboo at the family dinner table and sends nervous shivers down the spines of politicians terrified of losing the conservative vote. Immigration. For centuries, South Korea has prided itself on its homogeneity, its ethnic purity, elevating the concept of Danil Minjok, one blood, one nation, to the level of a state religion and national identity. Being Korean doesn't just mean holding a passport with a crest on it. It means having the right DNA, the right ancestors, and the right shape of your eyes. It is an island nation, not just geographically severed from the mainland by the impenetrable border with North Korea, but mentally isolated from the rest of the world by an invisible wall of xenophobia and cultural superiority. Here, any foreigner, even one who has lived here for 20 years and speaks the language flawlessly, will forever remain a 외국인, an outsider, an alien, a second-class citizen who will never, ever be accepted as one of us. But today, this proud isolation is violently colliding with reality. The country is physically running out of human beings just to keep the lights on. There is no one left to pick strawberries in the greenhouses of Gyeonggi-do, no one to change bedpans in the hospices, and no one to forge steel in the mills of Pohang. Korea finds itself trapped in a monstrous, unsolvable dilemma, forced to choose between two forms of death: A physical death, where the economy grinds to a halt due to a lack of labor, or a cultural death, where saving the economy requires opening the floodgates and letting in millions of migrants from Southeast Asia, dissolving their precious identity in the melting pot of multiculturalism. The government is panicking, desperately trying to engineer a compromise. They roll out visa programs like the E9, designed to import migrant workers strictly as living tools, as talking shovels and screwdrivers. Come here, work hard, but don't you dare bring your family. Don't you dare have children here. And for the love of God, go back home the second your contract expires. It's a deeply cynical system of exploitation, where people are warehoused in plastic barracks out in the fields. Their passports are confiscated, and they are paid absolute pennies by Seoul standards. But even this pipeline is drying up, because Korea isn't the only aging country in Asia. Right next door is Japan, also dying, but paying better and treating migrants slightly less harshly. There is Taiwan, there is China, which is starting to feel its own youth deficit. A global war for human capital is kicking off, a war for anyone still willing and able to work with their hands. And Korea is losing this war because it doesn't know how to be hospitable. It looks at newcomers with deep suspicion and fear, perceiving every brown face as a direct threat to its thousand-year-old culture. The average citizen watches the news from Europe, sees the burning suburbs of Paris, sees the ethnic ghettos of London, and says, "No, we don't want that. We would rather go extinct proud and pure than turn our safe, pristine Seoul into a cultural battleground." This fear paralyzes any meaningful reform. The government is terrified to even whisper the phrase mass naturalization because it would be instant political suicide. But the math is utterly unforgiving. To plug this demographic crater, Korea needs to import hundreds of thousands of people every single year. It needs 1 in 3 residents to be a migrant within 20 years, or the entire system collapses. Picture a Korean school in the future, where the classroom is filled with Vietnamese, Filipino, Uzbek, and Nigerian kids, and the teacher is trying to explain the nuances of Confucian morality and strict social hierarchy to them. For the average Korean, that image is worse than a nightmare. It is the absolute end of their world, the end of their history. And so, the nation will likely choose the path of the samurai, the path of fading away slowly in proud isolation. They will try to replace humans with robots, desperately attempting to automate everything from street sweeping to elder care, just to avoid letting strangers into their home. This is the ultimate tragedy of a closed society that built towering walls to protect itself, only to realize those walls have turned into a prison and will very soon become the walls of a crypt. They desperately hope that artificial intelligence and humanoids will save them, that machines will fill the void left by unborn children. But robots don't pay taxes, robots don't take out mortgages, and robots don't build families. Korea is trying to cheat destiny. It is trying to buy labor without buying humans, but it doesn't work that way. Hands always come attached to hearts, souls, prayers, and foreign songs, and Korea is absolutely, fundamentally unprepared for that. We are watching the death throes of a nationalism that has mutated into poison for its own people. The question is no longer whether Korea can assimilate migrants. The question is whether anyone will even be left to remember what it means to be a true Korean once the final gatekeepers of pure blood fade into oblivion, leaving behind perfectly clean, hyper-technological, yet completely alien cities. Every story has a beginning, and every story has an end. But it is incredibly rare that the absolute end of an entire civilization can be predicted down to the exact year, as if it were the release date of a new smartphone or a summer blockbuster. For South Korea, that date has already been set. It is carved into the cold marble of government statistical reports, and that year is 2750. That is the year, according to the grim calculations of the National Assembly, when the very last citizen of this country will pass away. The final native speaker, the last living keeper of the memory that life once boiled on this peninsula. Try to close your eyes and fast forward to that exact day. Picture Seoul, 700 years from now. It is no longer a metropolis of neon and noise. It is a colossal, majestic necropolis where nature has finally taken its revenge on technology. Thick vines wrap around the decaying skeletons of the Lotte and Samsung skyscrapers, turning them into towering vertical gardens. The roots of ancient trees shatter the asphalt on the grand avenues of Gangnam, and deep down in the flooded subway tunnels, where millions once rushed to work, water flows silently, and colonies of bats have claimed the darkness. Inside a sterile room, in a building that was once the finest hospital on Earth, lying on a perfectly preserved medical bed powered by an eternal nuclear battery, is a profoundly old man. He is surrounded by the most advanced machines ever built. Robotic caretakers with kind, synthetic human faces, gently wiping his forehead, adjusting his pillows, and whispering words of comfort perfectly generated by the ultimate algorithms. But there is not a single, living, breathing human being in the room. No children, no grandchildren, no great-grandchildren. He is the last. When his heart finally stops, when the flat line on the monitor emits its monotonous, endless beep, an entire world will vanish along with him. The Korean language will disappear because there will be no one left to speak it. Korean culture will evaporate, leaving behind nothing but dead bytes of data on rusting servers. The memory of wars, of triumphs, of the love and suffering of 50 million souls will be entirely erased. It will be the quietest death in human history, a death that no one will mourn, because there will be absolutely no one left to cry. This is the grand finale of the great experiment called efficiency, the ultimate finish line of the race for success, where Korea beat everyone else, but in the frantic sprint for the gold medal, completely forgot why it ever stepped onto the track in the first place. They built an absolute paradise for the consumer, but a living hell for the human being. They engineered the perfect environment for capital to thrive, but an environment totally toxic to life itself. And this empty, overgrown peninsula will stand as a towering monument, a terrifying warning to the rest of humanity, to you and me. Look at them while they are still here. Stare into their gleaming cities and their empty cradles, because South Korea is the canary in the coal mine. This is us in 50 or 100 years. Tokyo, Beijing, Berlin, Moscow, New York. We are all marching down this exact same path. We are all infected with the same virus of isolation and selfishness. Korea is just sprinting faster than everyone else, serving as our vanguard, the first to step off the ledge into oblivion. History does not forgive mistakes, and nature abhors a vacuum.
The vanished Koreans will be replaced by others, by those who weren't terrified of having children, those who didn't place corporate ladders above their families, those who perhaps didn't know how to manufacture microchips, but knew how to love life in all its messy, loud, and unpredictable glory. The earth will belong to them, and all that will remain of the miracle on the Han River will be beautiful, haunting ruins that future archaeologists will study, endlessly wondering why a great civilization that had absolutely everything ultimately chose nothing. This is the chronicle of a death foretold, broadcasting live right before our eyes, and the most terrifying part of the show is that we cannot change the channel, because we are the next ones in line for the exit. If you don't want to miss what the sunset of humanity looks like,
And if you truly want to understand the gears of history that grind nations into dust, hit the subscribe button on this channel right now. We talk about the things they won't say on the news. We rip the glossy facade off this world, and we will be right here until the bitter end, documenting every single step into the abyss. Hit the like button on this video so the algorithms show it to those who are still asleep, and let us know down in the comments. Do you believe there's a way to save this? Or do you think we've already passed the point of no return? Subscribe and ring that bell, because soon, this might be the only place left to hear the truth. Right up until the very last server shuts down in the dark.
See you in the new world, or whatever is left of it.